Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to walk you through the manufacturing sector in Canada. So basically my agenda will be, I'll talk about the trends, I'll look at a sample of the manufacturing statements and how they're produced. I'll talk about costing method. This is how basically companies cost their goods, manufacturing goods. I'll talk about productivity because that influences how companies are able to keep control of their cost efficiencies. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about the Conservative Party, who's now not the official government, but what their policies were in play for manufacturing. And I'll talk about government policies overall, and that's both provincial, federally, and municipal. Then I'll bring in some key quotes from business. This is just a disclaimer, so this is basically just my perspective of manufacturing in Canada. Just a little bit about me. I'm a CPA CGA, but I have about 25 years in academia, industry, as well as financial solutions. So let's look at manufacturing sales. In general, in Canada, they're close to about $650 to $700 billion of business every month, every year in Canada. And this kind of shows you the key sectors that kind of drive it. Manufacturing is about 10% of GDP. That's just to bear that in mind in the overall things, because it drives both consumer spending as well as exports. This just shows you a sample between a merchandising business and a manufacturing. The biggest change here is in manufacturing we'll have three types of inventory. We'll have work in process. These are goods that haven't been completed yet. We'll have raw materials. We'll have finished goods. These are things that are going to be sold in terms of out the door. This shows you kind of a profit and loss statement. I won't spend a lot of time here, but it kind of shows you how things are generated versus just the manufacturing statements. So that's what that's showing you in terms of the lines. There's different costing methods, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but there's what they call as absorption, variable, standard, and activity-based costing. This is the way companies pull their cost buckets together to cost out things in terms of their pricing. Key costs for manufacturing are raw materials. That's driven by commodity prices, which are usually set US dollars or by a particular exchange. Labor, union versus non-union contracts, so depending on the labor rates, that's what comes into play. Hydro rates are a provincial jurisdiction, so they'll set the industrial and residential rates. That's where you'll see that into play. Equipment depreciation, so this is what companies will invest in capital to modernize it, and there's accelerated depreciation methods for manufacturing. Other overhead can be anything from administration, marketing, whatever. It's all part of the overhead to run a manufacturing operation. Currency rates, that drives, so if we're driving exports out, because Canada's only so big as a country in terms of its market size, we're only about 36 million people, which means we only have a small consumer marketplace, so we require exports. Currency rates impact that, so if we have a lower Canadian dollar, it makes our exports cheaper. Productivity, this is just looking at how we do things in most efficient and effective manner. So if we're not producing things efficiently, that usually adds more cost, and that puts pressure on business, and that's what this is really telling you. This shows you where Canada, in terms of productivity in 2012, we were only marginally better than a lot of countries. That's because most of the countries have done worse in terms of productivity. So there's huge pressures on Canadian companies to be more productive. This is just looking at labor, but it gives you an idea of the productivity issues. Capital investment, if you look at around the globe in terms of GDP, Canada's pretty a laggard in terms of how they spend money on capital investment. And capital investment drives modernization. Modernization is part of the overall productivity gap. This shows you kind of the keys, and it's breaking into what companies specifically do. Private sector companies in Canada have not invested enough in innovation. Innovation is key as you move products to market, and that's a key thing that's a driver here. Now, there's been a lot said that Stephen Harper hasn't done much when he was in office for power. In office, he did actually keep the taxation rates for the accelerated rate for machinery and equipment for manufacturing. He cut the corporate tax rate from 22% down to 15%. He brought in some strategic investment funds like aerospace, food processing, forestry, automotive to kind of support innovation and provide funding to help these businesses move products forward. Going forward, we've got significant challenges facing business in Canada, and a lot of it's probably going to be driven by a multitude of policies. We've got hydro rates, which are provincial jurisdiction. We've got infrastructure spending. If it's not targeted to exports as well, it won't help the overall manufacturing sector. Taxation. If business has to absorb more taxes, that means that it's going to put their cost up. They become less cost competitive. You'll see funds out there that the government's kind of trying to provide grants to businesses. That's critical, but in the same token, it has to be strategically there to the benefit of business that makes the most sense. Carbon taxation, we're on a big agenda 21, which is pushing up costs. That's another area you need to watch out for. Environmental assessments, this is the process it takes to get a project off the ground. They're too slow both from the federal and provincial level. That needs to change. Rules with corporate taxation, we're already seeing in Alberta, they raise corporate tax. That's something you need to watch. Property taxation is another area. That's all part of the urbanized area where you've got significant control and cost pressures in municipalities because of the lack of arbitration and pension reforms. That's going to drive issues there as well. Development fees, that's the fees they're going to charge to develop land. It's something you need to watch as well. Here are some key quotes to bear in mind here. I took them from multiple sources, and some are positive and some are negative. But in general, what business is saying, you let us compete. Don't bring in bad policies and work with us. We will create jobs. And that's what they're trying to say here with this context. What you're not hearing from the provincial governments and even the municipal government, they're not doing enough on their policies to get control of it to support growth. Federal government only has control over a certain amount of policies, and that's something that's misunderstood when you start seeing the 300,000 manufacturing jobs that have lost. What you need to look at is all aspects of policy, and that means a lot of it's being driven by municipal and provincial more than federally. So what do we do now going forward? Well, the private sector itself has to make some key decisions, and some of those decisions are innovation, some of those decisions are in training. Okay, there are funds available, as I discussed earlier, to leverage some of that through automotive funds and different government funds. So business has to take a step back in what they're going to do. The provinces, the municipalities, and the federal government have to get together on an integrated strategy for manufacturing that will support long-term growth. The time for talk is over. The time for action is required now. We're in a phase now that we have to do certain things specifically to bring back those jobs or stabilize the manufacturing sector in Canada. We're at that critical phase now. It's not about bringing in more bad policies. It's about bringing and supporting an industry. We can talk about the rhetoric about every party, about policies. What is critical here is we need to drive investment, and it's foreign direct investment that's going to drive jobs, and it's trade agreements, export agreements, and breaking down internal trade barriers, which is critical to move this economy forward. Thank you.